Welcome back to Camera West TV. My name's Carlo, and on today's episode, we're taking a look at a wide versus standard focal length with the Leica Q43 versus the Leica Q3. It's kind of a update to wide versus telephoto, but more standard focal length. So what's new and different between the Leica Q3 43 and the original Leica Q3 is obviously at first glance the gray leatherette versus the black leatherette. And then you have a 28 1.7 Summilux lens versus a 43 APO Summicron f2 lens. So for this video, we're gonna stick to a wide versus standard focal length comparison. We're gonna be going over this camera and lens in a separate episode of Thumbprints and Signatures. So be sure to like and subscribe down below, and then let us know what you think of this new lens. So we're just gonna walk around this area of San Francisco. It's a beautiful day, and compare the different focal lengths. For this comparison, I'm gonna just be using the camera on full auto. Very basic settings, but for the most part, it's on program. I'm just gonna compare the focal length of 28 millimeters to 43 millimeters. Now, obviously, 28 is gonna be wider, 43 is gonna be closer. So we'll just see how these different lenses interact with the environment. And the 28 has a different crop range from the 43. So I'll be doing a few comparisons, punching in with the digital crop. So that's one. Oh, gotta go way further back. So as you can see, I had to step further back just to get a photo with the 43 millimeter. It's not all that wide, but it's also not that close. I feel like it gives good perspective, so it brings all these houses and the trees and the landscape much closer, giving it a little bit more scale. Let's see, this might be kind of cool. Just this path leading to the cliff house. Cool. The Q3 43 offers the same digital crop function found in the standard Q3, but this time you have frame lines for 60 millimeters, 75 millimeters, 90 millimeters, 105 millimeters, and 150 millimeters. Even though both of these cameras feature 75 millimeter and 90 millimeter crops, the compression of the 28 versus the 43 millimeter are inherently different. You have a wide focal length that tends to push out the background and allowing for more of your scene to fill the frame, whereas the 43 millimeter focal length tends to pull in the background, causing your backdrops to become a little bit more sizable to scale, which results in a much more pleasant crop, especially when you're going for those longer focal lengths. Even though this lens doesn't truly mimic the actual focal length in terms of compression, I think the 43 millimeter adds enough compression to your images, especially at those longer crops. I definitely felt like I was able to get more reach out of it, especially when I was comparing the 90 and the 75 millimeter crops. You could just notice that the background was a little bit further away in the standard Q3 versus the Q3 43. You got two small cameras next to one big camera. The lens is up there. The 43 millimeter has a unique focal length where it feels like a 35, but it feels like a 50 at the same time. It's obviously somewhere in between, but I think the added compression still gives a sense of scale, especially in your surroundings. There were times where I felt like using the 43 millimeter suited the situation best versus the 28, and vice versa. I think different scenes call for different lenses depending on what kind of photographer you are, especially if you're looking to accentuate a landscape or exaggerate a landscape. Typically with the wide angle lens, you can fit more in your frame, have more kind of subjects, more details, more things to put in the frame, whereas the 43 millimeter or standard focal length or a telephoto focal length, you have the ability to add some depth, some compression. You're able to isolate certain subjects, and you can be a little bit more abstract with your compositions. Jesus Christ, that's sharp. All right. One of the other differences is the minimum focusing distance in the Q3-43. You now have a new minimum focus distance of 0.6 meters versus the 0.3 meters found on the Q3. And then when you go into macro mode, you have a minimum focus of 0.27 meters versus 0.17. Even though you can't focus as close with the 43mm f2 APO Summicron as you can with the 28 1.7 Summilux, I think the added compression makes up for the lack of closeness that you can't get with this camera. And then even when you're using the macro modes on both of these cameras, the difference is pretty close in my opinion. Even though you can get much closer with the normal Q3 and the 28, the compression still adds a factor and makes up for that distance. So I think both in macro mode, it's pretty negligible. For the normal focal length, I kind of like the 43 a little bit more. It adds more scale. For the most part, it makes everything a little bit more proportionate. You get a little less distortion, even though this lens doesn't distort that much. But having that apochromatic correction really defines and makes all these fine lines pop, especially for all this detail in all these flowers. I shot both of these at their maximum aperture. So the 28 is at 1.7 and the 43 is at f2. Also, while in macro mode, the camera will automatically stop down the lens by 1 stop. You can see the difference in bokeh, you can see the difference in compression. So leave a comment down below or let me know which photo you think looks the best. Personally, I kinda am still leaning towards the Q3-43. This lens just looks really good. I'm not one to always like shoot plants, but having the ability to focus this close, especially finding wildlife like this, it's kind of incredible to see how much detail was rendered on this wasp. Like, it's kind of scary looking. Look at those hairs. Okay. 1, 2. Crazy. Was that Burberry? Cool. This is where the tilt screen in these cameras really come in handy. I'm too short to get a clear shot from over the fence or from through the fence. I gotta go so far back for these. It's the one thing with kind of standard focal lengths is you have to keep in mind how far away you have to be for scale and kind of angle or field of view. Obviously with a semi-standard focal length, you have to go further back, and then with the wide angle, you can get a little closer. So it changes the perspective that you're getting in each photo. So you have to keep in mind eye level, field of view, how far away you are, etc. Next, we made our way to the casting pond, and funny enough, there weren't too many people out that day, just this young fisherman practicing, and we asked him if we could make a few photos. It was really impressive to see how much detail and sharpness both of these cameras were able to produce, especially shooting wide open. You can still see that the fishing line stands out and doesn't blend into the background, and it's razor sharp. For this test, I'm just kind of shooting everything at f2 to kind of see how it handles all these different lighting situations. Oh no, you caught a dog. Good job. That's so funny. We also came across this guy with pretty cool glasses. I asked him if I could take his portrait, and both of these were made from the same distance, so you can kind of see from a portraiture standpoint the differences between a wide angle versus a standard focal length. Then I started to photograph different scenes with the way I thought looked best per the focal length. So with the 28, I was trying to fill the frame, and with the 43, I was trying to carefully compose different scenes. All of the daylight images were shot at ISO 200. And I was still really impressed to use both of these cameras handheld at night. I was shooting at ISO 6400, both at their respective maximum apertures. So on the standard Q3, f1.7, and on the Q3 43 at f2. Using both of these cameras at night was honestly kind of fun. It was really cool to see how well both of these cameras held up in very low light situations. Both have the same maximum ISO of 100,000. And like I mentioned earlier, the 43mm was still my favorite by the end of the day. I found myself really loving all of the photos made with it. You can see that the color rendition is just a little bit different. I think this is now becoming a question of, do you need a Summilux lens or do you need a Summicron lens? Is 1.7 more than enough, or is f2 more than enough? I think these are very interesting questions to ask yourself when you are deciding lens choice, or in this case, which Q3 would suit your needs. But I found myself needing each focal length for different reasons. There were times where I was too close and the 43 felt not wide enough, and so I would opt for the 28. And sometimes the scene was a little bit too vast and I needed a little bit more control to hone in on a very specific composition, so I would lean towards the 43. Now, even though they both have their digital crop factors, I think the comparison between the two focal lengths lend themselves to different types of photography. The compression that you get from the wide angle lens still pushes your background out a little further than you would like, whereas the compression of the 43mm focal length added a little bit more depth to the photo, bringing in my background much closer and made people seem more to scale. I think definitely in low light situations, the Q3's 28 1.7 lens was the stronger contender. So I think when you're comparing both of these cameras, it's a little unfair to give them a true comparison because they are so different. Internally, they are the same camera with the same sensor. They just perform and serve different needs for different types of photography. I think at the end of the day, you would just need to figure out what you need from a camera and what type of photography you would like to do with that camera. For me, I definitely found myself leaning towards the Q3 43. I just love the way that the lens rendered, I love the focal length, and overall, I think it was a refreshing take on a classic camera. We've been wanting a longer focal length or a different focal length on the Q system for over 10 years now, so it is really cool and refreshing to see this new lens and kind of have like a callback to its history with the 40mm lens in their compact systems. So it'll be interesting to see how this lens fits within the Q system moving forward. The Q3's 28 Summilux 1.7 lens has been around for almost 10 years. It's a testament to how good this system is and how well this lens works for this format. I think they're just two different cameras that offer benefits in different scenarios, but they can both stand on their own. I found myself really liking the compression that you get with this lens. It offered a little bit more versatility versus just packing the frame with the 28mm lens. And obviously sometimes you don't have to get as close. Sometimes it's nice being able to stay far back or just step back a little bit to widen your field of view. I think there's something poetic about that, where to fill the space, you kind of have to go backwards instead of forwards. But also make sure to leave a comment down below what you think of the new Q3 43 and if you like the new focal length, or do you still prefer the wider focal length? Or the better question, when can we get this focal length as an SL lens? So I hope you enjoyed getting to see the differences between the Q3 43 and the normal Q3 with the 28 1.7 Summilux lens. So whichever direction you go, whether you go f2 APO or f1.7 Summilux, I think you're gonna have a fun time using either camera, and they'll allow you to achieve different visions or perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't be able to with either camera. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the full episode coming soon. Thanks.